Hello, how are you guys doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm playing a little bit of catch-up, so to speak, because most of you guys probably noticed I wasn't posting many videos the past few days. And as I said on Twitter, I was actually out of town on a work trip, so wasn't able to cover any news that happened to break while I was gone. And of course, while I was gone, it seemed like the most amount of news possible actually was getting out there onto the internet, man. It was crazy. There was so much stuff going down, and I was just busy doing some, traveling stuff and being preoccupied with all that, which was great. But as I saw that there was things going on with Nintendo and the PlayStation 5, the Xbox One all digital thing, it was just like, oh my God, like every day, it's like more crazy news, more crazy news, more crazy news, rumors, leaks, fakes, this and that. And I was like, I just am going to be overwhelmed by the time I make it back home. And so, even though there were some of those things I mentioned, like the PlayStation 5 information, which is really crazy and really interesting to me, and the Xbox stuff, I think that the main first topic that I wanted to try to cover, now that I'm back home, is this crazy information and this leaked picture of the Nintendo Switch Mini. Because, man, in these last couple of days, so much conversation, so many news stories and articles, a lot of people, my fellow friends and YouTubers covering this as well. Apparently, the Switch Mini and the Switch Pro are again making their rounds in the news cycle for what feels like the 10th time over the past year. I've discussed it many times. Usually when it's made the rounds in the news cycle, I've definitely discussed my thoughts and opinions on the idea of a Switch Pro or a Switch Mini, whether or not I believe them, whether or not I want them or like the ideas, what I expect them to do if in fact they turn out to be real, all of these things, and even as my opinion has sort of changed and evolved as time has gone on. And I'll get into that in a minute, but in this last news cycle from the last couple of days, we saw more reports coming out that the Switch Mini and Pro are apparently real, and initially the Pro was the first thing rumored that was going to launch sometime around the summer this year, 2019, so, in the next couple of months, apparently. Now it seems like that might be pushed way back to whenever, we don't even know if it's even real. And now it's the Switch Mini that's apparently supposed to come out first, come out this summer, maybe over the next couple of months, or by the end of the year in fall. So, essentially before 2019 is over, all this stuff says the Switch Mini is supposed to get out. And that's also where this leaked photo of a Nintendo Switch Mini came from. So if we take a look at the photo that kind of made the rounds, we'll take a look at it right here. This apparently is this leaked photo of a Nintendo Switch Mini. And, I have a lot of feelings on this. Trying to even disregard my own sort of bias against the idea of a Nintendo Switch Mini even making a lot of sense. When I look at this photo, or let me also say this, whether or not I even think the Switch Mini could be real or not, because I definitely think it's something that might be real. What the Switch Mini might allow you to do is the things that I've had pretty strong opinions on, and I still maintain those, and I'll get into that in a minute. But again, going back to this picture here, if we just consider this photo as a leak of the Nintendo Switch Mini, I am so hesitant to believe this. I basically just don't believe this, you guys. And there's a main reason why I don't believe this. And for those of you who have been following me and listening to my opinions for a long time, I'm talking going back 2 or 3 years, you might know where I'm already going with this, and I even referenced this in a video recently as well. The reason I don't believe this is because you can't put anything by people on the internet nowadays who want to start a hoax, who want to start a fake thing, who want to get fake leaks out there and get people excited just to be the ones that had this cool, information and got people talking. And it's the main thing for me is this just reminds me of the damned NX controllers from 2016. Because, the Nintendo NX, we know, that's what the Switch was before it was called the Switch, before we knew anything about it. And 2016 was like the year of the Nintendo NX rumors and leaks and fake hype and all this stuff. And that was a huge year for my channel. I was doing YouTube for a few years at the time that the whole Nintendo NX thing happened. And, I was constantly talking about stories. I was doing a podcast at the time, The Juice Was Loose, with a lot of my buddies there. And it seemed like every other week there was a new rumor or an article or a leaked photo or something about the Nintendo NX because we were so curious about what the thing was going to turn out to be. And as we all know, Eurogamer is actually the one people who actually got it correct. They actually did have the inside scoop on what the Nintendo NX was going to be and that it was going to be the Nintendo Switch. But around the Eurogamer thing was just tons of things about what is Nintendo doing, what's the NX going to be. And one of the things that came out of that was this controller, which for about 2 or 3 weeks, if I remember, these photos of the Nintendo NX controller made the rounds, and people believed it, and it looked and felt so real to people. And it turned out to be fake. The person who created it confirmed it was fake and even had a video where he showed what he did. And it was just something that he 3D printed. I mean, to be fair, it's incredibly accurate and impressive 3D printing, because I mean, I didn't even know 3D printing could get that sort of fake glass that is reflective on the surface of these things, man. It's incredible what this thing was able to do and achieve. And while that part is interesting, I was super upset about the fact that this was something that somebody thought was interesting to do. I was like, why is that even entertaining for you to do this and make it fake and try to put it out there? Like, who cares? What are you doing with your life and your free time that this is how you choose to spend it and that this is what you get entertainment out of? I was very upset about it, and I still kind of hold those same opinions. But what that showed us was how far people will go to make up something fake and to try to sell the internet on the idea of this being real, this being a true leak, and getting everyone talking about it. And to be fair, all of us talked about it at that time. Myself on my own channel, us on the podcast, plenty of other YouTubers. It was insane. And so that whole event, coupled with so many other things we've seen over the years, which I've talked about, faking the new Nintendo Switch operating system that kid made, you know, his video of him playing around and in the menus and stuff of the Nintendo Switch, the stupid Grinch leak where people photoshopped photos and things like that, Rayman and Smash Bros. I've touched on these before. These things, and especially that fake Nintendo NX controller, really show what people will do. And if you think about it, the Nintendo NX controller is even more applicable to this, because what the guy did with the NX controller was took an already existing sort of story around the NX, which was that, you know, Nintendo patent for a controller that basically mirrored 100% what that guy created. I mean, literally, those pictures of a Nintendo controller patent came out, and that guy just basically copy and pasted into his 3D printer and made exactly what that thing was, which should have been a red flag to most people that that wasn't real, because that's not usually how patents turn out. What we're seeing here with this photo of the Nintendo Switch Mini, the quote Mini, I should say, is, you know, the rumor says it's a Nintendo Switch where the Joy-Cons don't come off. And so this guy clearly, I mean, just created exactly that. I mean, he just took a Nintendo Switch and connected the Joy-Cons with whatever he made, probably 3D printing, or maybe he has access to making real actual plastic and metal molds with whatever he does for a job, or he has access to a factory, or engineering know how to do. I mean, there's so many reasons we saw with that fake Nintendo NX controller that somebody might have the skills or the ability to make something fake like this. And it sounds like he literally just read an article discussing what the rumor of the Mini is and just made that exact thing so that it clearly matches the pictures in our heads of what this thing is supposed to be. As far as I'm concerned, that's what I'm seeing here. So that's why I really don't believe this image and that whole thing. Now, when we think about the idea of a Switch Mini even existing, I mean, you know, I've discussed this before, I've gone back and forth. The idea of a Mini existing has always been something that I could sort of see Nintendo doing. I don't necessarily think they should, and I more believe that it's something that they wouldn't do. But this story about a Switch Mini, and a Switch Pro to be fair, continues to not go away. And you've got bigger sites like Wall Street Journal talking about it. That's a huge one, and Nikkei's talked about it, and so many different forums, and everyone's talking about it. So, you know, to be fair, it's one of those things where there's smoke, there's fire, and the smoke to the Switch Mini and Pro thing continually does not go away. Every few months, it seems like it pops back up in the cycle. Now we get these photos. So yeah, I'd be foolish to not believe that Nintendo might consider it. I still think making a Switch Mini, it's like, what is that really going to accomplish? You know, obviously knocking some money off of the price is obviously huge. Removing the ability to use Joy-Cons just seems weird to me. It seems kind of dumb. It doesn't mean Nintendo wouldn't do it, but it makes it hard for me to believe Nintendo would see it as a good idea or a smart product, even though there is something to the idea of them replacing the 3DS with something that feels more like a dedicated handheld. But then we get into the other aspect of this thing, which is whether or not a Switch Mini, if real, whether it matches this photo or not, a Switch Mini being able to connect to a TV. Now, the one thing I've stated from the get-go that I don't believe Nintendo would make is a handheld-only Switch. I've never said they would truly never make a Switch Mini, but a handheld-only Switch, a Switch that absolutely cannot be played on a TV, whether it's using a dock or whether it just plugs from the Switch into an HDMI in the back of your TV, whatever, or even if it could frickin' stream to smart TVs, whatever the thing is, a handheld-only Switch is the one thing, the one concept of this whole Mini Pro thing that I still kind of want to push back on. And I'm prepared to be wrong here if Nintendo shows us that that's what this thing is going to be. But I'm going to stick to my guns until I'm proven wrong. And whereas, yeah, a Switch Mini might be real, I feel like a Switch Mini is still likely going to be able to be played onto a TV. I know Michael Pachter thinks that they're not going to do that. Michael Pachter and a couple of other YouTubers think that they will make a Switch that cannot be played on a TV. That was Michael Pachter's prediction at the beginning of the year, a handheld-only Nintendo Switch. I don't believe that. I think any Switch device, any upgrades or changes, Pros, Minis, Super, Lite, whatever they do, I think every single Nintendo Switch device will connect to a TV and will allow you to play just like a home console on your TV. That just makes sense to me. It sounds like what Nintendo would want to do. And I've discussed this before. A good friend of mine, Smash JT, he said this, and I repeated that on a video previously. He brought up the point that Nintendo pulled the 3D feature out of the 3DS and changed the name to 2DS. And that is a very good point, but I don't think that that's how Nintendo would look at the Switch specifically. I think the switching ability of the Switch is way more integral to the gaming experience that is the Switch than the 3D was to the 3DS. Even though 3D was in the name of the console, I think that it was easier to pull that out and change the name for people and still sell it as the same device than it would be to remove the Switch, because you couldn't even call it the Switch. Like, if you have 3DS and 2DS, they're so clearly obviously the same thing. But Switch and non-Switch? Would it be Switch and unswitch? Or would it be Switch and just Nintendo whatever? I mean, suddenly you couldn't even truly call the thing a Switch, right? And that becomes a big old mess, a big old confusing marketing campaign. How are you going to sell people on the idea? It just, nothing's impossible, but it's really hard for me to see a world where Nintendo would want to sell a device like that. Even if they make a Mini, even if they make the Joy-Cons always stuck to the device, I just don't see them doing that. Now, as far as the Switch Pro goes, that's a different situation. I initially started off not really wanting to believe too much of this idea of the Pro when that first broke as a rumor. I don't know, I want to say fall last year, maybe September, October time, I don't remember, but it was sometime mid to late last year, 2018, that started to happen. And initially I was like, well, I want to believe this report because it sounds like the kind of thing that turns out to be true, but I was still pretty skeptical at the time. Now fast forward to today, where there's been several constant, time periods where this story's popped up, including right here and now. And, as I've said on videos, like, my opinion has definitely evolved as more information and more rumors and stories started to come out about the Pro. And so, while I'm still not 100%, into believing this, it does make sense. And as I've said, people who I know behind the scenes, good friends of mine, people who would be in the know, do very much believe that this thing is going to happen. And, I said this recently. I don't want to repeat too much of what I've said in previous videos, but I do know people who have behind-the-scenes info. Every once in a while I get behind-the-scenes info, but I never go out of my way to tap those resources and to ask people, ooh, give me the dirt. If they bring it to me, that's fantastic, and that does happen, but I never go out of my way. So I could start talking to people who I know behind the scenes and be like, hey, what do you really know about the Switch Pro? Give me the details just so I know. I choose not to do that because that's not how I like to build friendships and relationships with people through my YouTube thing. So, when friends bring me stuff, that's great. That's not what's going on here. So I'm just as not in the know as you guys when it comes to the Switch Pro, kind of by choice. And so my opinion on it is that, after so many months of this thing popping up, it certainly seems pretty plausible. And, unlike the changing of the 3DS to the 2DS, this is one where Nintendo's precedence to do this stuff does feel a little bit more real, the way they did upgrade the 3DS, over time. And so I want to believe that Nintendo might see an advantage to doing this. Not to mention Sony and Microsoft did it, and they saw pretty decent success with the One X and the PS4 Pro. And so it's like, yeah, maybe a Nintendo Switch Pro or a Super Nintendo Switch is on the horizon. Maybe it's not 2019, maybe it's next year. I don't even know. But gosh, I've talked about this so many times, you guys, but people seem to be really interested in this stuff. I just wonder why Nintendo would do this based on what's happening in gaming right now. I feel like if they're going to do a Switch Pro, they should put it out sooner than later, because I personally feel, and everyone has different opinions, a lot of people push back on this, but I've said it for a long time, and my stance on this has not changed. I feel Nintendo cannot turn a blind eye to new hardware from Sony and Microsoft. There's a whole conversation about how much they compete and don't compete with each other. Nintendo versus Sony and Microsoft, Switch versus PlayStation and Xbox. Are they competitors? Are they not? Yada yada. I believe that while Nintendo carves out its own market, at the end of the day, without question, they are competitors. All three of them are paying attention to all three of the players. They're all looking at each other. Nintendo ain't ignoring Sony and Microsoft, and Sony and Microsoft ain't ignoring Nintendo. Flat out, I believe that is a fact. And so while Nintendo can get away for a while with maybe saying we don't need a direct answer to the PlayStation 5 and next Xbox immediately, I think very soon, I mean 2 years max after those consoles launch, Nintendo will need new actual hardware, a successor to the Switch. Not a Switch Pro, but a successor. And if anything, not because they have to worry about the PlayStation and Xbox specifically, but what they do have to worry about, even if they want to ignore Sony and Microsoft, they can't ignore developers. They can't ignore the games that third-party developers are making for those devices. And the longer Nintendo has a huge gap between their hardware and Sony and Microsoft's hardware and PC hardware, then the farther away from getting those third-party games they're going to be. And suddenly, Grand Theft Auto 6 and Red Dead Redemption 3 and the next Doom after Eternal, and whatever else continues to happen, Skyrim 6, Elder Scrolls 6, the next Fallout, these big game companies that Nintendo's working with very well right now, Ubisoft's next games, if they're making games to max out the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Scarlet whatever in 2 or 3 years, the Nintendo Switch that we know, even a pro version of this thing, ain't gonna cut it. And suddenly Nintendo's not getting those great games. And we've seen with the Switch how much it's a benefit for Nintendo to be getting games like Doom and oh my god, LA Noire and Resident Evil and so many other things. I mean, what is it? Wolfenstein, Skyrim. Nintendo is benefiting by getting these third-party games. Mortal Kombat, Doom Eternal. These games matter. And if Nintendo creates a bigger gap by ignoring the PS5 and the Xbox One, then they're also ignoring those developers. And suddenly, we'll go back to another Wii U situation, where you're only buying it for those few great first-party Nintendo games. And I mean, that's cool, and we like that stuff, but don't we also like playing Doom portably? And aren't we excited, for those of us who are choosing to play Mortal Kombat 11 portably if we want? That's the thing, right? And so Nintendo isn't going to want to ignore third parties anymore. They made that mistake in the N64 era, my favorite console of all time. They made that mistake in the Wii U era. They tried really hard with third parties, but they ultimately failed. And I don't think that they want to continue that. And so, this is a whole long tangent to get us back to the idea of a Pro. The point I'm making is, if a Pro releases, then that means it's a stopgap until their next console. And so the farther off we are until Nintendo might release a Nintendo Switch Pro, that means the farther off we are to the next console after that. And with the PS5 and the Xbox One, the Xbox sequel looming, Nintendo needs to be careful with how they release an upgraded Pro, which segments them, stopgaps them, until their successor. And then when you compare the Pro to the PS5, Xbox 2, to the next Nintendo console after that, you have these 3 huge console releases, hardware releases from all these guys, and they have to sort of line up to a degree. Again, Nintendo can ignore Sony and Microsoft to a point, and they can go their own direction with their hardware and their innovation to a point, but eventually they need to sort of veer back and make sure they're not totally not paying attention to those guys. Just like Sony and Microsoft have learned several times over not to do that with Nintendo and say, oh, forget Nintendo, let them do their own thing. They tried that with the Wii, look what happened. They had their asses handed to them, and they both tried to copy the Wii, and they failed spectacularly because they can't do what Nintendo does. And it's happening right now with the Switch, where they tried to ignore Nintendo because the Wii U was so bad, and then look what happened when the Switch came out. It came out, and it's been just dominating since it launched. Even though PS4 is still doing quite fine for itself, don't get me wrong. And so, all this whole stuff, I'm just blabbing and yelling to you guys about this, but all of this means the Nintendo Switch Pro and the Mini. Whatever Nintendo may want to do to release its own unique new hardware upgrades and changes into the market has to happen in a specific way and at a specific time, and they have to do certain things that make a lot of sense. For me, I think that the Switch Mini needs to be able to connect to a TV in some way. The Switch Pro needs to be able to hopefully add games to the library. You know, I don't really like the idea of a Switch that has some games that are exclusive to it, like only the Switch Pro can play the Resident Evil 2 remake, but the regular Switch can't. I think that that's dangerous territory for Nintendo, but as I've started to believe the Switch Pro, I've started to realize that that's probably what's going to happen. And I guess I'd rather have more games available for one of the Nintendo Switches than not. So I think that while I question that as a business decision, if that turns out to be true, I think that that might be what they do. And so I'd like to see some great third-party games become available on the Nintendo Switch if releasing a Pro is what they're going to do. And I would like to see it sooner than later, so I would believe Nintendo isn't going to get so screwed by the other hardware from Sony and Microsoft. So I get really worried about that, if you can't tell. So, I don't know. This has been a rambly video, but I think that that's most of what I have to say. I think I've exhausted most of my thoughts. So, I don't know. That's what I feel, man. I want to hear from you guys. Does this make sense? Everything that I'm kind of spewing here at you guys? Do you maybe disagree? Do you think that Switch Mini is guaranteed? Switch Pro is guaranteed? They're going to do all the great things. It's going to do everything that I don't believe they won't. You know, do you want these things? Do you want these devices? Do you see Nintendo making devices like these? What do you think of this stupid leaked picture? Do you maybe believe it? Because, hey, I could turn out to be wrong, man. You know, all of us who don't believe it, we might get proven wrong. That happens. I'm not ashamed or afraid to admit that. Like, I haven't built my channel on the idea of I predict everything correctly and I have all the inside sources and get the inside scoops. That's not what it's about. Just my opinions and thoughts over news stories and things that happen, and when rumors and leaks happen, I enjoy talking about them. That's just what I do. I'm just a guy giving my commentary and sharing my opinions. So what do you think about all this madness? So much to break down. A busy week while I was out of town. And that's it. This video is going to be a wrap. So discuss it below. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Ro2R Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video.